Welcome, everybody, and thank you for logging in. For those of you watching the recording, welcome to all of you, live or watching the recording. I think tonight's discussion is one of my more interesting and unique topics. We're talking about psychology, but we're also talking about, as part of that, what can you do to develop mental toughness? What is mental toughness? Or do you just grit your teeth and make fists and punch the air? Well, that doesn't get you much of anything. Just suck it up, buttercup. That doesn't get you anything. Um, have mental toughness. That doesn't help at all. How do you develop that? What are some of the tools of mental toughness and some psychological elements to get you through the marathon? Things that you can do that help you deal with what you're dealing with on a physical level. But in this case, utilizing psychology to help get you through it. Um, at any rate, let's get the party started. We're going to share my screen here, and here we go. There you go. With that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for logging in today. And there you go. Um, if you have a body, you are an athlete. There are a lot of people that aren't able to say, I am an athlete. And I got to tell you something. If you can run 1 mile, you're probably way better off than most of the people on this planet. Yes, indeed, you are an athlete and you are about to become a marathoner. And that is a title you will hold the rest of your entire life that no one can ever take away from you. And I hold that title with great pride personally. Um, at any rate, that's me. The book that I co-wrote. At any rate, so let's get into it. Um, the topics tonight, don't categorize yourself. I already just talked about, you're an athlete. The question is how fast can you go? I am a 4 hour marathoner. I am a 5 hour marathoner. I am a whatever it is. Don't categorize yourself yet because you don't really know what your finish time is going to be yet. I mean, yes, we are getting closer. Yes, you are in hopefully a pace group that will get you to the finish line at a certain specific time within a minute or two or so of that time on the sign from the moment that your chip and you and your pace leader with the sign crosses the starting line. But you don't know that maybe that's not where you're going to end up. Maybe you can push ahead. Maybe you made mistakes. You're in the wrong group and you might fall back behind. All those things are good. Don't categorize yourself yet. Um, until we don't know what we can do. We don't know what we are capable of doing until after we have done it. And there's so much great truth to that. I cannot begin to tell you. A lot of people right now are thinking, God, how the hell am I ever going to do a marathon? I'm not a marathoner. Don't categorize yourself yet. You're going to be a marathoner. You will get there. Before this one, I'll talk about now rituals. Before the race begins, I'll talk about this more in depth as we get closer to the marathon, which we're not too far away from now. Think about something that you can do that motivates you, that stimulates you, and says, I am in a good place. I am surrounded by good people that I like, and I am safe and I am comfortable. I may be nervous as heck because I don't know what's going to happen. Um, but a lot of that is, just thinking of things that may or may not be true or come true. And you can always overcome those obstacles, but come up with a ritual that puts you in that place. Maybe it's a religious pendant that you can touch, where that's around a chain on your neck. Maybe a prayer you say. Um, I know this is crazy. I used to, the starting line, talk to my dog that died years previous because we used to run together. And that was kind of my ritual. I always ran with my dog and I really miss her a lot. Um, That put me in a kind of good place for me. At any rate, come up with a ritual to yourself. There was once I heard a lecture about a basketball player. Um, before taking a free throw, before standing there and throwing at the basket because he had been fouled, before taking a free throw, he would bounce the ball once, hold it, bounce it a second time, hold it, bounce it a third time and hold it. And then he'd take the shot and he'd make or miss the shot. And somebody once asked him, why three? Always the same three dribbles, hold it, and all the same ritual every time. And his response is I have three kids. And he did that because it was a ritual that reminded him of his kids and put him in that kind of safe place where he was emotionally motivated, but he felt like he was at home. So we're also going to talk about mental toughness, and let's dive into all of that. Psychologically, 90% of your cerebral processes, the information that goes into and from your brain, the synapses of your brain, and all of the data that comes and goes through all of those little synapses in your brain, 90% of that is completely unconscious and that you are unaware of at any time in your entire life. Case in point, how many of you are completely aware of right now what your pancreas is doing? Probably nobody. Your liver, nobody. Your spleen, nobody. Kidneys, nobody. All of these vital organs are functioning right now, and you are completely, your liver, all that, you're completely unaware of any of them on an active, conscious awareness. Even when you're asleep, your brain creates the functionality for all of these vital organs. Even when you're asleep, your brain is still functioning. Your brain does not just shut down ever, even when you're asleep. Because like I said, there's a lot of work that your brain does. I just heard a lecture the other day that about 50% of all the food that you eat goes into, or maybe it was carbohydrate that you consume. I don't remember. Any rate, um, 50% of carbohydrate or food, whatever it is, goes into just mental function. Your brain consumes a lot of calories just thinking. That's why one of the reasons why we can just sit there for hours and hours on end and end up being hungry is because when you're working on something, you're thinking. And other reasons, your vital organs are still functioning and all that. So you get hungry, you use calories, even just sitting still. So I mentioned before, don't categorize yourself. We don't need to go over that again. And don't sell yourself short. We're eventually going to talk about the last 80 minutes of your marathon, where you might find that you can speed up. Leave your pace group the last with 80 minutes left to go. Leave your pace group and go faster to the finish line. Beat your pace group to the finish line, and you will be rejoined with them as soon as they cross in the finish area. And you can all talk about how well you did and give each other high fives and all that. But you could maybe, depending on how you're doing, depending on how you're doing your training, the greater the volume within reason, the greater the fitness. The greater the fitness, the faster you will be, the better you will be on a marathon, or the easier your marathon will be. You can overtrain by doing too much, but that's categorized by you're slowing down, you're exhausted all the time. This malaise of fatigue envelops your world all the time. After like 2, 3 days of that, some overtraining, great. Too long overtraining a period, no, you're damaging your marathon. So you can, there is a balance with everything, all of this. Um, and like I said, proper training and focus can change who you are. It'll change who you were last season. because you'll be faster or slower. It can change how you think about yourself. Every season, you are a different person because maybe your training changes a little. And there also is no magic pill. There's nothing that I can give you that says, I'm going to do this marathon, LA marathon. I am now going to win it. Here's the pill and go for it. I don't care if it's even illegal. There is really no magic pill that will get you to an elevated level that's that extreme. Uh, so here we go. Rituals, we already discussed this kind of. Find something that calms you, makes you feel at home, gives you hope and motivation. Maybe like I did, some sense of spirituality, something that you just enjoy, and motivates you that may calm you down. Some of you who are really nervous, this is something we'll discuss later in this lecture. Maybe really really nervous. Some nervousness is okay, you know. We'll discuss that in a little bit with what the bottom thing here, stories that you tell yourself. We'll get into that a little later as well. And here we go. Mental toughness. Now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of tonight's talk. Um, One of the ways to develop mental toughness is just plain simple training. I got to a certain mile. I felt great. I know I can do this. Your training gives you the ability to understand I can do this. I am confident because I know I will do it. Some point in your training, hopefully, for my first marathon, somebody once asked me, how do you know you're going to finish a marathon? And I said, well, I got to mile 18 and I said to myself, you know something? I know I can do this. Before that, I wasn't sure. But for me, that was my moment in training for my first marathon many, many years ago, where I knew after that run, 18 miler, I knew I'm good. I know I can do this. There's a point you get to, you just plain know. And your training will help you develop that, the confidence comes with the ability. If you're physically capable of doing something, hey, I can be confident. I know I can do it. Pretty simple stuff. Now let's get into the more complicated psychological elements of this. The stuff you may not have even heard about in lectures on YouTube and that kind of thing that I'm a little proud of. I can't say I invented any of this stuff. I can't say that it's even mine alone, but here are some ideas. Some subconscious thought. I've always said a single negative thought can kill you. Now, what do I mean by that? A single negative thought can kill you. Essentially, the idea is, I don't mean you're going to drop dead on the ground. No. But it can, here's an example. I heard a lecture by a guy who won Kona Ironman. And the first time he won it twice. And the first time that he won it, he was running neck and neck with this guy for miles. It was this just huge battle, and they were fighting it out. And his nickname was Maka, if it, the Ironman triathlon. At any rate, and he talks about it very openly. As soon as he started late in you end an Ironman with a marathon, right? So late in the marathon, with like 2 miles left to go, he started to pull away from this guy he'd been running right next to for miles, right? And he started pulling away, and he got to the top of the hill, right? And he turned around. He saw the guy behind him start to go up the hill. He did one of these, smiled at him, and he knew he just destroyed this guy's confidence, and he knew he was going to win the race. even though he had about 2 miles left to go. And this guy could have caught up to him. He wasn't that far behind. It was a small hill. Um, we all have these subconscious thoughts. That guy behind him, his subconscious thought was, ugh, I lost. I'm done. He's already at the top of the hill, waving at me and smiling like he's won, the jerk. Um, and instead of getting angry and catching up to him, which was the story of Heartbreak Hill in Boston Marathon. The guy did that to a guy, tapped him on the shoulder as he went by him, passed him by, went to the top of Heartbreak Hill, and then the guy who got pissed off ran past him and won the race. Story of Heartbreak Hill. Um, at any rate, instead of having a positive thought, he had a negative one. Oh my God, I've lost. Right? So a single negative thought can kill you. It's not over yet. You're not done. Even if you're like walking, it's not over. You still got some things, some tools that you can use that we're going to go over that you can use to get you to that finish line. And you will all get there. Um, Physiologically, we can discuss that another time. Experiences. Um, your experiences can benefit you or they can hurt you. If you are somebody that has had a lot of negativity in your life and you harp on that during a marathon, you will never, as an endurance marathoner or endurance athlete, do as well as you could if you can wipe those things away from your mind and just plain have fun out there. Just enjoy being with the people you are with and enjoy those experiences. People with a smile. As a matter of fact, there was a study done where people who smiled, just changing the facial expression to a smile, did, and nothing else changed. People who smiled had more energy from smiling than people who did not. I know that sounds crazy, but if you smile, you will do better than if you don't. And you'll drive everyone else crazy because you're at mile 20 and you're smiling, and everyone else is, oh my God, I'm at mile 20, I'm dying. And they'll be like, what the hell? They're smiling. So if you're a road runner, make sure you're smiling. Anyway, it will help psychologically. It's shown through study that that one facial expression change will help you physiologically. I know that sounds hard to believe. Limiters and governors. This is interesting. You don't actually ever run out of glycogen, right? You don't actually ever run out of anything. But what happens is because of this 90%, this unconscious, subconscious thought, right? We talked about earlier, um, your body will actually, your subconscious mind will actually shut you down because it has certain limiters. It says, generally speaking, when you get to about 40% of your glycogen levels left, carbohydrate become blood sugar or blood glucose, blood sugar, blood glucose, whatever you want to call it, becomes glycogen. It resides in your muscle as this kind of white honey-like substance. It's basically it is kind of a honey-like substance. It's sugar, right, that resides right in the muscle. It's what makes meat taste good. It's sugar. I know that sounds disgusting. I'm sorry. I'm a vegan. I know I say that all the time, and I probably shouldn't. Anyway, um, so your brain will shut you down, and suddenly, even though you feel great, even though you're doing well, even though you're not, your muscles and everything is functioning perfectly well, suddenly, boom, it hits you, and you're walking. Or if you're a walker, you're walking slow. You're just done, but you're walking. Of course, when you're walking, your heart rate comes down. When your heart rate comes down, you're using way, way, way more fat as a resource for fuel. So you could theoretically walk slowly to the finish line, whether you're a runner, run walker, or a walker. You can get to the finish line because you're using more fat and very, very little carbohydrate to continue this progression to the finish line. Um, so you'll get there. But what happens is you have this limiter, you have this governor in your subconscious brain that will shut you down when your levels of glycogen get low enough. That's what's called hitting the wall, bonking, crashing, burning, whatever you want to call it. That's what it's all about. And there are other reasons why you might become sluggish because you're dehydrated, same thing. Your body will shut you down. You're sodium depleted, so you're not absorbing your hydration, your liquids very well. And so you may become dehydrated even though you're drinking enough, but you don't have enough sodium to absorb it, right? Drink a bunch of salt. I mean, you'll really be thirsty. Um, don't have any salt in your diet, and you probably won't be thirsty ever, even though you're dehydrated. And that's not a good place to be. We all need some sodium um, to 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 hydrate, and also for neurological function. But that's a whole different discussion, neurology. Um, at any rate, you do have these limiters and governors that if you train to excess to a point where you hit the wall a bunch of times, I'm not saying you have to do this, you can actually push that governor a little farther than what it normally might be. Um, I'm not suggest I'm only explaining this whole thing. I'm not suggesting that you do that, right? You don't want to become enormously dehydrated or whatever. You can push limits of glycogen a little farther, certainly, by lowering your glycogen levels so much so that you hit the wall, and then suddenly your subconscious mind gets used to it, and eventually you can go less, you can go take that 40% even lower. And that's all part of training. Um, there are other things such as speed, where your subconscious will limit how fast you can go, how high your heart rate can go. Your subconscious mind limits and governs how much and how far you can take certain elements of your life. In other words, your VO2 max, your HR max, your maximum heart rate, there is a governor. Beyond that, you start getting lightheaded, you start slowing down, your body will start shutting you down when you get above a certain heart rate. You can actually, with experience, by just pushing it to that level consistently, you can actually raise the bar on how fast you're able to go and take your heart rate. I'm not saying don't push it too high. We don't want to do that. There are reasons that your subconscious brain has limiters and governors. There are reasons for safety for those things. Our body is an amazing tool, and and there are all of these things that go into it that we're really not aware of at any given time. Um, but we do have these safety guidelines in our brain um, to understand. And okay, at any rate, so how do you develop mental toughness? Well, we already talked about 95% mental. Oh, excuse me, we didn't discuss this. There is a discussion that says we already discussed 90% subconscious, right? But there is this discussion out there that it's kind of a macho thing that I do not subscribe to whatsoever, that says, oh, it's just 95% mental. It's 90% mental. It's all in your head. Just do it. Suck it up, buttercup. What do you do with that? That doesn't help anybody. And no, it's not just 95% all in your head, because if it was 95% all in your head, those people who think it is answer this question. And the question is, if that's the case, it's all in your head, then why don't you win the LA Marathon or at least come close to it? The answer, it's not all in your head. There are physiological and neurological elements that hold you back or enable you to do better. I could go in a long, long discussion about recovery being a part of it, muscle ability, all sorts of it. There's a long list of what makes people faster or slower, and that's just inherent in who you are. It's not all in your head. I love those people. It's no mental. No, then go win the darn marathon. I mean, come on. I just find that laughable. Anyway, anyway, so training. Here's a perfect example of how training can impact your mental toughness. Okay? Say it's raining outside. I look at what I'm wearing. I am wearing like two thick sweatshirts, a t-shirt, and a winter coat. And I'm comfortable right now. I don't have the heat on, but I was sitting in an office that was really frigid earlier. And I have just no zero mental toughness to cold. I don't. I go on a treadmill when it's cold out. I confess, I run indoors on a treadmill. That's me. Now, if I wanted to overcome that, keep in mind, I come from Toledo, Ohio, where it was snowing outside, and I used to stand out there with a simple winter coat on, and I used to stay warm, even though my moist hair, because I got out of a shower and dried my hair, had frozen. You touch your hair or any moisture, it becomes like a rock because it's frozen. That's what I grew up with. And I was perfectly okay with that. Why? Because I was used to it. I just went out every day to catch the bus and I'd be standing out there and the snow would be coming down and I got used to it. Well, since 1984, I moved to Los Angeles and I become a total complete weather wimp. But if I wanted to get used to, as I have in the past, cold rain, it doesn't matter. You get wet. We all take showers. We all swim, whatever. It's okay. We get wet. We all sweat. Being wet has nothing to do with it. It's being cold. And yes, moisture does generate temperatures like cold and heat more so than dryness does. But because most of our bodies are like, what is it, 60% of your body is all just moisture, right? Right, high or liquid. So if you're soaking wet and it's cold out, you're more susceptible to the cold unless you're wearing a lot of layers or whatever, like I am, but I'm not wet or whatever. But you get used to it to a great degree just by going out there and doing it. So, like I said, when you were fearful of going too fast and raising your heart rate too high, slowly going a little faster, a little faster, and a little faster will one, get your subconscious mind used to going a little higher heart rate, and also your conscious mind getting used to going a little higher heart rate because you're now used to it. Speed work is not something that a lot of us are comfortable with. I am because I love the adrenaline that comes with speed work. But a lot of you are fearful of going too fast. Slowly going a little faster, you get over that. So training with all of these things gets you used to it, gives you mental toughness you didn't have before. That's just another example of what I discussed earlier. Um, in the middle of your run when things get tough, this is something we don't discuss, and I haven't really heard a lot. You can meditate. I was running down the street as a pace leader years ago, probably about 15 so years ago. I was leading, I think it was group six. I led group 5 and 6, our 410, 420 roughly groups. And I think it was the 420 group, 422 actually back then. Now it's 420. And we were going down the alleyway between the jetty and back to what was then our finish, which was a kind of, about a half mile south of Washington Boulevard. So we were about 2 miles to go, running down that alleyway called Speedway in Marina Del Rey. And there's nothing really to look at. And not long after we entered that alleyway coming north off of the jetty, somebody said, my hip hurts a little. And my hip started to hurt. And immediately thereafter, my thigh hurts a little. And immediately my thigh started to hurt. And somebody else, my right knee started, and my right knee started to hurt. And on and on. I finally said, okay, here's the deal. I said, can everybody, while we're running, come here, let's have a chat while we're running, just huddle up kind of. And so everyone kind of got a little sort of closer. And I said, here's what I want you guys to do. Count your steps. Like every fourth step, every other step, whatever it is, just count your steps. Like one, two, three, four. An example of every fourth step, or every one, two, three, four, every other step. I said, just count your steps and think of nothing but numbers, counting your steps. It doesn't matter whether you go from 1 to 10, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000. Personally, with my leg reach, I find that my stride length, I find that when I hit 100, I'm another mile ahead of where I was before. So you go into this kind of meditative state, and all you can think about is numbers, and the numbers give you a rhythm, and that rhythm sustains your pace, how fast you're going. Just because you're counting one, two, three, it sustains that rhythm. And just count your steps. I once met a yogi who was a runner, turban, the whole deal, and he was a runner. And I asked him, if you count your steps, would that be a form of meditation? He said, yes, absolutely. He said, true. And he said he does that often himself. And he said, anything that you can do that has a rhythmic quality to it, even the words that a yogi will give you for meditation will have kind of a rhythmic quality to it, a watagu, whatever it is, that you do over and over again in a kind of rhythmic quality. And all you can think about is this nonsensical word that means absolutely nothing. In this case, the numbers really mean absolutely nothing. Although I did find that when I hit 100, and for me, I was a mile ahead of the game, I had a little, moment of, kind of enthusiasm. But then I kept counting and, it started all over again. Um, Count your steps. If you're now, hopefully, none of you are struggling on these longer runs, even toward the end of them, because you're at an aerobic level. You don't want to be struggling during training runs because, if you start, it's all about heart rate. And if your heart rate gets too high and you're kind of struggling, that means you're using too much carbohydrate. That's why we don't have a lot of carbs out on the course. And you may be using too much carbohydrate. Now, you do need to consume some calories doing this long period of time. So we do ask, yeah, please bring some of your own because, with 200 or 100 people, we just can't have enough gels for everybody, every 3 miles or whatever it is. That would be just insane. I couldn't fit it all in my car. Let's put it that way. Um, but Regardless, you don't want to get to a point where your heart rate is too high because then you're not getting that aerobic base building. You're too high. Your heart rate is too high. You're wasting your time. And I cannot emphasize that enough, but that's a whole other lecture, which hopefully you've already had on aerobic versus anaerobic training. How do you build endurance? Low heart rate. How do you build speed? Short and fast. Got it? Higher heart rate. Enough said. Now, I already discussed the single negative thought can kill you. Um, Go to the next thing you see. Another tool for mental toughness is, and my wife did this during a marathon once. There were cones across this marathon, and she happened to do 3 marathons in 3 days, which most people would say, well, God, that's insane. Actually, doing one marathon, most people would say, God, that's insane. On the other hand, personally, I think not exercising at all is insane because we know that from studies, you die younger, you have more greater risk for ill health. But most people think that we're crazy and God love them, let them die younger and be ill and whatever. We won't be. We'll do way better than them. And okay, we're crazy. Um, I always love to say that. I know it's kind of negative and I apologize, but it's true. Anyway, glad to be crazy. So run like to the next thing you see. Just pick a point. She would pick the next cone down and she said, okay, I'm going to run at this pace to that cone. Or I'm exhausted. I'm going to walk to this next cone. Then I'm going to run to the cone after that. Pick a point. This is just psychologically help with mental toughness, a tool. Pick a point and go to that point, right? Then pick the next point immediately and go to that point. Got it. And it will motivate you to keep going. Break down your marathon. I always broke my marathons down by four. Every 6.5 miles, I had a fuel belt bottle that I would fill. That I already had the powder in it that I wanted. I could not do Gatorade. Well, we don't have Gatorade on this course, but back in the day when it was Gatorade, I would put a different powder in my little fuel belt bottles and I would leave them dry. And every fourth of the marathon, I would fill up another one. And it was part a ritual, but I also made sure I would finish it. And so each quarter of the marathon became not only the new water 7 ounce fuel belt bottle to refill, but also became, okay, a victory. I did that. That part of it is done. Now, what's ahead? What do I do in the next quarter of the marathon? The first quarter of the marathon is probably the most important part, I think, and you're going to hear more about it in another lecture coming up in, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, at any rate, on how to run the LA Marathon. But we will also be doing the first 6 miles of the LA Marathon because that's where the biggest hills are in the marathon. I've always said you screw up the first 6 miles by going up those couple hills too fast. There aren't that many, but they can be big. Um, you've screwed up the rest of your race. If you get to sunset at about 6.23 miles into your marathon, a little after the 10K, maybe as much as 6.5 miles into your race, when you hit sunset and you turn left headed to the ocean, if you're feeling like, hey, I'm just getting started, perfect. You're going to be behind schedule. If you're a 10-minute marathoner, mile six, you will not be at 60 minutes. You'll be at like 63 minutes or 62 and a half minutes or whatever it is. But perfect, perfect. That's where you want to be when you hit sunset and go left. You're through the big hills. You can, if you're feeling like, hey, I'm just getting started, that's where you want to be. You'll hear how to deal with that on a mile by mile basis in a future lecture. Um, Here's a big one I have never heard before, ever in any lecture I have heard about endurance sport or psychology of endurance sport or any of that. And what I want all of you to do is think of something that gives you some enormous volume of emotion. It makes you cry. It makes you laugh hysterically. It makes you enraged, like you want to murder somebody. Whatever it is, it could be true story, something that happened to you. It could be a movie you saw that really affected you. It could be um, something completely fictional that you invented, right? Um, that guy running next to you or that woman that just murdered your dog. Could be something totally fictional. That person could be the nicest person, most biggest dog lover on the planet. Could be whatever it is that gets you enraged, right? Um, have that story, real or fictional, in what I call your back pocket. in the back of your brain. And when things get difficult, when things are a struggle, and you're really pushing the last few miles of the race, and physiologically, we will discuss things that will cause you to get fatigued and really struggle toward the end of your marathon, or physiologically benefiting you, like taking sodium, carbohydrate, hydration, all of those physical things that will help you. But psychologically, have that story in your back pocket that you can take out of your back pockets theoretically, right? It's not really in your back pocket, it's in your head, but that you can think about, and it just gets you going. It gets your adrenaline going. If you're a parent, you can think, oh my God, I left my kid in the hot car. They're going to die. And you might speed up just because you've totally psyched yourself out. Your kid may be at home resting. They may be taking a nap in their bed, completely comfortable. But in your mind, you've got this story. Oh my God, I left my kid in the hot car. They're going to burn up and die of asphyxiation. No. If you have kids, that might work. Um, that old boyfriend that really pissed you off and broke up with you with a text, right? Um, he's right behind you in the marathon, and you are not gonna let that win. Got it? Pardon my B word, but or girlfriend, I suppose, or whatever, partner. um, Something that really pisses you off, right? Like I said, a funny movie scene or something, like I said, completely invented, like the person next to you is, an axe murderer, and oh my God, they're going to kill me. My wife actually uses me as a tool in her mind to motivate her to go faster. And the tool is that I am going to catch up to her and beat her, and she will not let that happen because she's a little competitive. And uh, that motivates her to go faster. She has told me, and certain times in certain races, that my being in the race motivated her to go faster, even though I confess I am slower than my wife. She always gets, well, usually, almost always gets to the finish line. Um, I think once I beat her to the finish line because she was actually doing interviews or something along the way. She actually physically had to stop. And I passed her by when there was like a camera on her or something, and she was being interviewed by, somebody of the press or whatever that was planned. Um, Other than that, I think she has beaten me every marathon, but she still panics that I might be behind her and catching up. So that's a tool that she uses and it works effectively. Okay. Um, and Obviously, there are physiological reasons why you will be slowing down and becoming depleted, which we've really talked about and in other lectures and will again, with our discussion of the LA Marathon and doing the mile by mile breakdown, which we will do in a few weeks, including what I wrote here. One of many things, factors, get in 40 to 60 milligrams of carbohydrate per hour. Something for you to right now start thinking about. If goo is 22, 23 grams of carbohydrate, how many goo? Well, two of them an hour would only be like 46. So, all right, two an hour would put you in that ballpark. One every 40 minutes or so, plus some electrolyte at almost every or every other table. The electrolyte would give you probably about 4 milligrams of carbohydrate per cup, right? Per table stop. They're like 10 tables. It's water, electrolyte, whatever it is. Every other table, like 10 tables long each mile. It's not just one table like we do in training. It's like, 40 people handing you cups. That's the marathon, what it's going to look like on race day. That's what it will be every mile of the race. There are 2,500 volunteers that go into the LA Marathon. So figure out what you're going to do LA Marathon wise, um, how much electrolyte can you tolerate? How much goo or another gel can you consume? Um, Figure it out right now. That will help you out, but that has nothing to do with the psychological element. Um, there are really only a few books, and I did this lecture about exactly 2 years ago, um, in January 2 years ago. But back then, there were only two books that I found, or two authors, I should say, really. Endure was a book by Alex Hutchinson, a New York Times writer and a New York Times best-selling author. Endure was the name of the book, about a bunch of different stories where people endured horrific experiences and lived where, most would have died and many did or whatever. Um, Motivating book, very interesting, well read, written. Um, and Matt Fitzgerald, a runner himself who lives up in Northern California, and I can't think of the name of the city. It starts with an M. I can't think of the name. Anyway, good runner himself, and he's written a slew of books, but books that have to do with the mental toughness issue and the psychological element of endurance training. Um, Brain Training for Runners being one. How Bad Do You Want It being another book by him, and The Comeback Quotient being books all written by Matt Fitzgerald that have some elements of that discussion that I've talked about today in them. Um, but with that, we've gone on long enough. So I say train smart and train to win, because if you don't, you won't. And if you do, you just might. And with that, I thank you all for joining in and sticking with this long discussion. I hope it's been somewhat fruitful for most of you. And with that, I say I'll see you at the finish line, which is where I will be standing. I'll see you at the starting line, and then I drive to the finish line, and I will be standing in that finish line. I will see you all at the finish line of the LA Marathon and the Rose Bowl half, which we will continue our training to finish out the Rose Bowl half on April the whatever the heck it is. Anyway, with that, thank you. And I am going to turn off the recording right now. And so for those of you at home, hang on. We'll answer all of your questions. For those of you who are watching the recording, I bid you a good day, and I thank you for tuning in and watching this recording. Goodbye to all of our people watching the recording.